Hello, dreamers, and welcome to Dreaming Isle. I'm here to guide you into a calm and magical place tonight. Before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe if you haven't already. It helps bring more dreamers to our little corner of the stars. And if you'd like, share in the comments, what's the world outside your window like right now? Now, find your cozy spot. Let go of the day, and let the story begin. The forest did not want him there. That much was clear from the moment Kalen stepped off the old hunter's track and into the hush beneath the trees. The air thickened like breath held too long. Light fractured above, broken by tangled branches that filtered the late-day sun into scattered shards of green and gold. Birds that had chirped moments before had gone still. Even the insects no longer sang. He hadn't meant to stray this far. He was only meant to scout the eastern ridge, check for signs of the boar herd that had been troubling the outlying farms. He had maps, tools, water. He had done this countless times. But somehow, without knowing when or how, the forest had swallowed the trail, and him with it. The map in his satchel had turned useless, the lines seeming to shimmer when he looked too long. Worse, it felt like the forest moved around him, subtly shifting paths, drawing him inward. Not with threat, with intention, as if the place knew him, or once had. He found the arch near a dry stream bed, nearly hidden in ivy. It was old, so old the black stone had faded to gray, and the runes across the top were nearly swallowed by moss. And yet, they shimmered faintly when his shadow passed. Not a ruin, a threshold. Something waited beyond it. He passed beneath, the chill immediate. The trees beyond were different, taller, older, and unlike anything he'd known. Their bark shimmered like dark iron. Their leaves whispered, though no wind stirred. And then came the bell. Not a chime, but a single note, clear, cold, resonant. It rang through him like a forgotten memory. He had never heard it before. And yet, something inside him whispered, "You're late." Kalen steadied his breath and stepped forward. The sound lingered in the stillness long after the bell itself had gone silent. It wasn't an echo. It was something deeper, like a vibration left behind in his bones. Kalen paused, his hand resting on the moss-soft trunk of one of the ironbark trees. The bell had rung only once, but it felt like a summons, or a warning. He moved cautiously now, every step deliberate, as if the ground might judge him unworthy. Roots arched across the forest floor like frozen waves, and pale mushrooms glowed faintly in their shadows. The air was rich with damp moss, distant loam, and something else, sweeter, unfamiliar. The path narrowed, though he hadn't noticed it forming. The trees seemed to part only for him, and even as he tried to trace his steps back with a glance, the way behind had darkened. He wasn't lost. He had been claimed. Up ahead, the faintest glint of silver caught his eye. Kalen stepped closer, brushing past a curtain of long, silky moss. Behind it stood a bell, free-hanging, suspended from nothing. It floated, unmoving, a few feet above the forest floor, shaped like glass, but etched with runes that pulsed gently like heartbeat rhythms. Around it, the air shimmered as if with heat, though the temperature had dropped again. He reached out a hand. Before his fingers could touch it, the bell sang again. A softer chime, almost sad. Kalen froze. This time, the sound wasn't alone. A second tone answered from deeper in the woods. Then a third, distant but clear. Not bells. Voices. Calling in the same note. Calling in recognition. Kalen stepped back, but the forest no longer let him. The moss, the path, the very shape of the trees pressed him forward. Something in the forest had remembered him, and now it wanted to see if he remembered it. The third bell faded, and the silence that followed was heavier than before. Not empty listening. Kalen's breath misted in the air, though no cold wind touched him. The forest watched, not with eyes, but with awareness. Every branch, every shifting leaf, felt tuned to his presence. He stepped carefully around the floating bell, resisting the urge to reach for it again. The path ahead curved in subtle ways, defined not by dirt or stone, but by suggestion. The trees grew closer here, their trunks marked with faint carvings, long lines and loops, almost like names. He ran his fingers across one. The wood pulsed. Not light, not heat, just a feeling, like someone whispering your name in another room, behind a door you cannot open. A clearing emerged ahead, oval-shaped, ringed with flat stones. At the center stood a hollow tree, its trunk split wide, as though lightning had cracked it from within. Yet it lived. Vines grew from its edges, and the bark shimmered with a gentle breath. Something lay within the hollow. He approached slowly. Inside were dozens of objects, small, deliberate things. A child's wooden toy, a ring of carved bone, a feather-stained blue, and there, nestled in moss, a pendant. Its leather cord long rotted, but the stone, a dark green oval etched with silver lines, pulsed softly. He knew it, but he didn't know why. Kalen reached down, hesitated, then lifted it from the moss. The forest shivered, not in rage, in remembrance. All at once, the carvings on the nearby trees glowed faintly, and he realized the loops and lines were not just symbols. They were names, hundreds of them, some fresh, others nearly lost to age. And one, etched deeper than all the rest, read, Kalen. Kalen staggered back from the hollow tree, the pendant clenched in his hand. His name, etched into bark that must have stood for centuries. He tried to reason with it. Perhaps another man, long ago, shared his name. Perhaps this was coincidence. But deep inside, he knew better. The forest was not echoing the past. It was calling the present back to itself. He turned slowly, taking in the names etched into the trunks. Most he didn't recognize, but others stirred vague memories, glimpses of faces seen only in dreams, names that left traces on the tongue without explanation. A breeze stirred the glade, and for the first time, Kalen heard the forest speak in more than silence. The trees creaked, not from wind, but from within, a chorus of wood and memory shifting under their own will. Branches moved, not wildly, but in a pattern, guiding, pointing to the north. Beyond the clearing, where the trees grew dense and dark, stood another arch. This one wider, its stones blackened by fire or age. Hanging from its keystone was a chain, rusted and cracked, but holding a single charm. A second pendant, just like the one he now held. Kalen stepped forward. Each pace brought a strange sense of familiarity, like he was walking back into a life he'd once laid aside. When he reached the arch, he stopped beneath it. The air here felt heavier, thicker. He looked at the second pendant. This one was cracked, but carved on its surface was a name. Therein, not his name, but one he knew, or had known. And with it, a flash of memory surged unbidden. Two boys standing by this very arch, exchanging pendants beneath starlight, making promises they were never meant to keep. Kalen fell to one knee. He had been here before, and whatever he had left behind, it hadn't finished with him. The memory hit like lightning, sharp and sudden, carving a line of fire across the fog of his mind. Kalen gripped the pendant tighter as the image of the boy, therein, flashed before him again. Dark hair, gray eyes, a quiet laugh, a friend, a brother, something deeper, though the shape of that bond remained just out of reach. He rose slowly, the two pendants now heavy in his palm. They belonged together, and he knew without knowing why that they had been parted wrongly. The promise beneath the stars, what had they vowed? What had they broken? The archway beckoned. The rusted chain swayed though no wind stirred, creaking softly like an old voice clearing its throat. Kalen stepped through. The forest beyond was different. Darker. Not sinister, just older. Trees leaned inward as though trying to hear better. The canopy folded tight, allowing only faint threads of light to fall, turning everything into hues of moss and shadow. Strange symbols marked the trunks here, different from the names. These were sigils, warnings, bindings, wards. The air carried a scent of old smoke and wet stone. Magic had lived here once, and something of it still lingered, curled like ash in the roots. Kalen reached a clearing ringed with stones, no longer a memory, but a ritual space. At its center stood a third pendant, laid carefully on a raised stone altar. Its surface was scorched, the silver inlay melted, and beneath the ruined metal was one word, still legible despite the burn. Forsworn. A weight pressed down on him. Not physical, not fear, guilt. Not all promises are broken by choice. Some are torn by time, some by betrayal. Kalen looked at the pendants in his hand, whole, cracked, and then at the one scorched with judgment. He had been one of three, and now he was the only one still breathing. Kalen stood in the ritual clearing, 3 pendants before him, one his own, one cracked, and one burned. The forest had grown utterly still, as though it too waited for him to act. The stones around the altar were carved with runes now glowing faintly, as if the memory of magic clung to them like moss to bark. He stepped to the edge of the circle. The moment his boot crossed the mossy line between stones, the clearing exhaled. A pulse of sound, not loud, but deep, vibrated through the air, bending the trees slightly inward. Leaves lifted as if caught in a rising breath. The ruined pendant flickered once, its glow almost too faint to see. Kalen knelt beside it, placing the intact and cracked pendants gently beside the scorched one. A triad, a promise, a binding undone. He remembered a voice, not Theron's, a girl's, older than them, yet still young. Her name was lost to him, but her face, sharp-eyed, with braids like knotted ropes, stirred something old in his chest. She had spoken the vow, bound by name, kept by stone, break the ring and walk alone. Kalen whispered the words aloud. The stones answered. Each rune ignited in sequence, tracing a line of fire around the circle. The heat didn't burn. It welcomed, invited. The air twisted above the altar. Not smoke. A figure. A shape formed slowly. A body made of ash and ember, flickering like candlelight. Features shifting but familiar. It was the girl, not as she was, but as a memory, broken and half-formed. Her voice came hollow and distant. You came back. Kalen swallowed, heart hammering. I never meant to leave. She looked at the pendants, at the scarred one in particular, then finished what was broken. The light in her chest flared briefly. Then she was gone, and the circle blazed open. The flames did not rise, they unfolded. Slowly, like petals made of heat and light, a ring of fire circled the altar, licking at the moss without burning it. The stones glowed brighter now, and in their light, the runes rearranged themselves, shifting like thoughts being remembered after a long silence. Kalen stepped back instinctively, shielding his eyes. But the fire didn't want to harm him. It wanted to reveal. In the center of the circle, the 3 pendants began to rise. First the whole, then the cracked, and last, the scorched. They hovered in place, spinning slowly, threads of light weaving between them like strands of memory reassembling. Then the air fractured. A rift, not torn but peeled open, shimmered above the altar. And within it, a memory played not like a vision, but like stepping into a forgotten dream. Kalen stood in the same clearing, but younger. Beside him, Thern, tall and grinning, and the girl, Saren. That was her name. He saw them as they had been, standing hand in hand, placing their pendants on the altar with solemn eyes. Saren spoke first, bound by name. Thern followed, kept by stone. And Kalen, voice trembling even in memory, whispered, break the ring and walk alone. Then the wind rose. The flames flared, and something else stepped into the circle. Not one of them. A shadow, taller than any of them, cloaked in wind and dark silk. It didn't speak. It only touched Saren's shoulder, and everything fell apart. Thern tried to stop it. Kalen turned to run. Saren. Saren smiled. The vision vanished in a rush of air, the pendants falling to the stone. Kalen gasped, the truth leaving him cold. They hadn't broken the bond. They had opened something, and Saren had let it in. Kalen dropped to one knee, heart thundering, breath shallow. The image of Saren, smiling as the shadow touched her, echoed louder than the vision itself. It hadn't been fear in her eyes. It had been willingness. But why? The flame ring around the altar slowly faded, its purpose fulfilled. The pendants now lay still, as if exhausted from the weight of what they had shown. Kalen reached for the scorched one and flinched. It was still warm. His fingers hovered above it. "Why did you let it in, Saren?" he whispered. The trees didn't answer, but something beneath the altar did. A low vibration thrummed through the stone, and as he laid his palm flat across it, the moss peeled back of its own accord. The surface cracked along invisible seams, revealing a hollow cavity beneath the slab. Nestled inside was a scroll, bound in copper wire and sealed with black wax. The seal bore a symbol he didn't recognize, 3 overlapping circles, enclosed within a fourth. He broke it gently. The scroll unfurled on its own, and there it was, the 4th name. Not Kalen, not Thurin, not Saren, but a name written in a script that bent the eyes to read, like shadows stitched into paper. Velmer. The name carried weight, wrongness, like it didn't belong in this world but had been carved into it anyway. His skin prickled. It wasn't one of them. It was what they had called. He rolled the scroll closed, hands trembling. Whatever Saren had allowed in that day, it had a name. And names, in places like this, were power. The pendants weren't just keepsakes. They were locks, and one had already burned. Kalen sat on the altar stone, the scroll clutched tight in his hands. The clearing had quieted again, but it wasn't the hush of calm, it was the tension before thunder. The forest didn't breathe. Even the air felt as though it waited for what he would do next. He looked at the pendants. 3 locks. 3 pieces of a seal. One already scorched, melted by time, or perhaps tampered with. If Velmer was still bound, then the bond was weakening. If it wasn't, he dared not finish the thought. Kalen slid the scroll into his satchel and picked up the cracked pendant. It felt wrong to leave them here, abandoned a second time. Whatever had begun in this place wasn't finished. And the bond, if broken entirely, might not just endanger him, but the forest, the villages beyond, and anyone who stepped too close. He moved to leave the circle, but something shifted. Not in the trees. In the air. The space before him bent, just slightly, like heat rising off stone. From that shimmer, a voice slipped through, hollow and quiet, like water echoing in an empty well. "You took the name." Kalen froze. It was Saren's voice, but twisted, faintly layered with something else. "Something wrong. You always wanted to know, even when I told you not to look." "Saren," he called. The shimmer sharpened. Her figure formed briefly tall, cloaked in vines, eyes burning with dull violet flame. It wasn't just her body that had changed. It was her will. She had given herself to Velmer. "I remember what we promised," Kalen said, stepping closer. "I remember you smiled." "I still do," she whispered. Then she vanished. Behind him, the cracked pendant split completely in 2, and something stirred in the soil beneath the altar. The crack beneath the altar spread with a dry, splintering sound, not loud, but final. Kalen stumbled back as a single root, blackened and thick with sap, coiled upward from the broken stone. It twitched as though sniffing the air, then turned sharply toward him. He drew his knife without thinking. It was small, old, a gift from his mother before her voice had faded and her memories had slipped like fog from the valley. He'd never used it for more than skinning or carving. It wouldn't stop whatever this was. The root slithered over the altar and curled around the scorched pendant, pausing for a moment as if in recognition. Then, without sound, it dragged the pendant down into the crack and disappeared. Kalen stepped forward too late. The altar pulsed once and collapsed inward, not broken, but devoured. The clearing dimmed. The trees didn't move. The sky hadn't changed, but the light had gone strange. A yellowish hue edged the shadows, like lantern flame held beneath old water. He realized it wasn't just light, it was presence. Velmer had taken root. Not fully, not yet, but it was growing. Through memory, through Saren. Kalen clutched the whole pendant, the last intact seal. He didn't know if it could hold anything back. He didn't even know if it was meant to. But he knew this. If the last piece was taken, if the memory was lost, then there would be nothing left to stop Velmer from blooming through her. He looked north. The forest thickened there, older than maps, older than names. A place the villagers called the Hollow Deep, where the roots whispered and the wind never quite sounded right. If Velmer had a heart, it would be there. Kalen turned, eyes burning with the weight of memory, and walked toward it. Every step felt remembered. Every root he stepped over seemed to watch. The forest thickened as Kalen pressed north, the trees rising taller, stranger. Their trunks twisted in spirals, bark gnarled like knotted fists, and leaves so dark they gleamed blue under the dimming light. No path guided him now. The ground was soft with rot and memory, every step muffled, every breath tasting of moss and forgotten things. The Hollow Deep. He'd heard the old tales, whispers in taverns, half-warnings muttered by old hunters after too much mead. A place where no fire would catch, where even birds dared not sing. A wound in the forest, too old to heal. He hadn't believed it then. Now, he wasn't sure he ever had a choice. The pendant in his hand pulsed faintly, the only warmth left in a world that had gone cold and breathless. It seemed to pull him forward, the silver etching glowing slightly with each step. At the base of a tree thicker than a house, Kalen paused. Carved into its roots were symbols, many of them matching the runes he'd seen in the circle. Others were older, deeper, etched so far into the wood they glistened black. At the tree's base, an opening yawned wide. Not a tunnel, a mouth. Vines hung like teeth, and a cold breath rolled from within, smelling of damp stone and long-decayed herbs. From somewhere far below, he heard a faint, rhythmic thump. A heartbeat. Not his. Not human. Kalen gripped the pendant tighter, slid it into the leather pouch at his side, and stepped through the roots. The Hollow Deep swallowed him whole. Instantly, all sound ceased. No leaves, no wind. Only the sound of his footsteps, and that deep, patient heartbeat waiting in the dark below. The descent was slow, each step swallowed by earth. Kalen moved through a narrowing tunnel of roots and damp stone, the air pressing close, heavy with the scent of moss and rust. His boots found purchase on half-carved stairs, their edges worn smooth by time, or perhaps by retreat. He lit no torch. Fire didn't belong here. Instead, the pendant glowed faintly from the pouch at his side, casting a pale, green-silver sheen that lit the path just enough to walk. Walls of stone, etched with the same looping runes as before, began to appear around him. They pulsed when he passed, once in recognition. The heartbeat grew louder, steadier, and layered now, joined by faint whispers that weren't quite voices. Thoughts, regrets, fragments of vows spoken and broken alike. The stone drank them in, murmuring their echoes with every step he took deeper. The tunnel opened at last into a wide chamber. Kalen froze. The walls curved upward like the inside of a hollowed mountain, vanishing into shadow. At the center stood a dais wrapped in root and vine. Suspended above it, unmoving, was a figure cloaked in shadowed branches. Her, Saren, or what remained of her. Eyes closed, limbs relaxed, floating as though dreaming. Vines fed into her back and chest like veins, pulsing with slow, sap-colored light. Beneath her, etched into the dais, was a massive circle of runes, 3 glowing, 1 dark. The bond, broken, and far behind her, barely visible in the gloom, a massive presence shifted. Not a creature, not quite. It was becoming. Velmer. Kalen's breath caught as Saren opened her eyes, gaze meeting his. No hostility, no fear, only sorrow. You came too late, she whispered, but not too late to choose. Kalen's pulse thundered in his ears, but the chamber remained impossibly still. The breath of the forest did not reach this place. The air here was ancient and unmoving, sealed, like a tomb that refused to forget what it had swallowed. Saren hovered above the dais, her voice a fragile thread between them. Velmer does not take, she said softly. It waits. And when you offer something, it never refuses. Her eyes, still her own, though dimmed, glowed faintly green, not with magic, but with memory. She had not been possessed. She had offered. Why? Kalen asked, voice raw. Why give yourself to this thing? Saren's gaze flicked to the dark room beneath her. To stop it, she said. We broke the vow. It started waking. I thought, if I offered my name, my will, it would sleep again. A pause. I was wrong. Behind her, the shadow pulsed. No form, no limbs, just a presence. Watching, waiting. A great pressure that filled the chamber like a held breath, curled deep in the roots of the world. And now, Kalen asked, now it's learning to be patient. It won't take me. Not yet. It's waiting for you. His fingers brushed the pouch. The last pendant warmed against his touch. The final seal. You can leave, she said. Seal the bond. Run far. Let it stay forgotten. Or, she looked at him, truly looked, and he saw the pain beneath her calm. Or take what I offered. Pull me free. Find it again. But it'll cost you. What? Your name. A beat. You'll be forgotten, Kalen. To the world. To yourself. You'll live. But no one will know who you are, not even you. Silence bloomed like a bruise between them. Behind her, Velmer stirred. Waiting. Willing. Welcoming. And beneath Kalen's ribs, the last ember of his memory burned, unsure if it should become fire or fade. Kalen's grip tightened around the pendant in his pouch. It pulsed like a second heartbeat, fragile and insistent. The weight of Saren's offer pressed down on him like the roots above, ancient, heavy, final. To save her, he would have to give up everything that made him him. Not die, something stranger, to be erased gently. His footsteps echoed as he stepped closer to the dais. The chamber didn't stop him. Velmer didn't reach out. It simply waited. The sort of waiting that didn't fear time, because it had already devoured so much of it. I remember our promise, Kalen said. Saren's eyes softened, just barely. I was the first to falter, she replied. I thought I could hold the weight alone. You shouldn't have had to. He removed the pendant from his pouch and held it out. The green-silver light flared brighter, washing the walls in swirling runes that pulsed with recognition. The rune circle below, Saren responded. 1, then 2, then all but the broken mark began to glow in rhythm. Then you choose? Saren whispered. I don't know if it's right, Kalen said, but I know it's ours. And with that, he stepped into the circle. The vines reared back like startled snakes, but they did not strike. The dais vibrated. The chamber trembled. Velmer moved again, not forward, not attacking. Anticipating. The pendant in Kalen's hand turned hot, the light now unbearable, until it melted away into his skin, leaving behind nothing but warmth. The runes flared. Saren fell, and Kalen caught her. For an instant, just one breath, he thought they had done it, that she was safe, that it was over. Then the pain struck, deep, silent, not of body, but of self. His name burned in his chest like paper and fire. Every memory, every connection, began to slip through his grasp like smoke. Saren looked up, tears falling. I'm sorry, but Kalen only smiled. I'm not. Then, he forgot. He woke beneath the roots, not from sleep, but from unbeing. The stone dais was cracked beside him. The air was still, damp with old breath. Moss curled along the walls like fingers drawing patterns across forgotten pages. The figure on the floor nearby stirred. Saren, whole again, unbound by vines, her breath slow but steady. He sat up slowly. Everything felt familiar, and yet hollow. His name, gone, not just lost, unwritten. He searched his mind for it, as one might search for a missing key, convinced it must be where he left it. But the space where it belonged was smooth, clean, untouched. He remembered how to move, how to speak, even how to grieve, but not who he was. Saren opened her eyes. Do you know me? She asked, her voice fragile. He hesitated. I think so. I remember everything, she whispered. Your name, it burned like a star when it left you. She touched her chest, where the vines had once fed. You gave it up for me. I think I did. You were always the one who carried things too far, she said, smiling sadly. Even yourself. He stood unsteadily, his body familiar, his soul untethered. What happens now? He asked. Saren rose beside him, her eyes brighter than they had been in ages. Now, Velmer sleeps again, bound in the hollow by your forgetting, but not forever. He looked toward the tunnel where roots parted gently to let in light. Then we go back. If you want, she said. The forest will remember you, even if no one else can. He turned to her, then glanced down at his hand. A faint green light shimmered in his palm. Not a name, but a beginning. They walked side by side through the winding roots, leaving the chamber behind. No bells rang now, no whispers tugged at Kalen's, the man's, ears. And yet, the hollow deep didn't feel empty. It felt quiet, like a book carefully closed after the last word is spoken. The forest above was not as he had left it. The light had changed. Not brighter, not darker, clearer. The shadows no longer pressed down but stretched gently beside them, as if no longer trying to hide what had always been there. Saren moved with ease now, her steps sure, her shoulders lighter. There were streaks of silver in her braid he hadn't remembered, and when she smiled at him, it was full of both sorrow and peace. You won't remember this tomorrow, she said softly, as they reached the glade where the arch once stood. I already feel it slipping, he murmured, touching his temple. Saren knelt and pressed a hand to the earth. The moss parted, revealing 3 stones beneath, smooth, worn, and each carved with a rune. She pointed to the first. Your name lived here. To the second, mine, kept safe. And the third, Varen's, lost, but not forgotten. She looked up at him. You may lose your name, but the forest won't. It holds memory differently. He reached for the stone that bore his mark. As his fingers brushed it, something flickered, an image of a boy laughing beneath moonlight, hands stained with ash, a voice swearing a promise never to leave. He didn't know who it was, but he knew the feeling. That was enough. Saren took his hand. The glade shimmered, as if the forest were breathing around them. The trees creaked, not warning, not mourning, but in recognition. They would walk out of the forest together, he without a name, and yet more whole than ever. They passed beneath the arch, its runes now dull and silent. The forest let them go without resistance. No shifting paths, no unseen hands steering their steps, only the sound of leaves brushing against one another, like whispers exchanging secrets they no longer needed to keep. The man glanced back once. The glade lay quiet behind him. No shadow stirred, no vine reached. Yet something in the air hummed, like the last ring of a bell after it's been struck. An echo, not of sound, of presence. Saren led the way. Her feet knew the forest, even as the man's memory thinned like fog at midday. He tried to recall why they had entered the woods, what weight had pressed against his chest just days ago. Nothing came, but oddly, he didn't panic. He still knew the smell of pine, the shift in light before dusk, the feel of bark beneath his fingers. He still remembered how to walk, to think, to feel. What he'd lost was only a shape in the mirror, the label, the word, the anchor. And yet, he was not adrift. They crossed a stream, and he knelt instinctively, cupping the cold water in his hands. His reflection rippled there, eyes dark and wide, a small scar at his brow, a face familiar but unclaimed. I don't recognize myself, he said. Saren crouched beside him. You're still you, she whispered, but no longer only you. You're part of something older now. The forest remembers you, not by name, but by deed. He watched the water for a moment longer, then let it slip through his fingers. No fear, no regret, only the faintest ache, like the last note of a song he could no longer hum, but still felt in his chest. The echo of who he had been, and the beginning of who he would become. They emerged from the forest at dusk, not the false dusk of the vale where twilight lingered unnaturally, but the true, gentle dimming of day. Light filtered across the meadow in soft oranges and golds, casting long shadows behind them as if marking their return. Ahead lay the village, small, quiet, with crooked roofs and windows aglow. A place where names still mattered, where stories were still told with ink and voice, not with bark and root. The man hesitated at the tree line. Saren turned to him, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to go back," she said. "Not if it doesn't feel right." He looked out over the fields, past the chimneys and fences, the laughter drifting faintly on the wind. "Will they know me?" Saren's voice was kind. No, the word didn't sting the way he expected. He nodded slowly, accepting it like rain. "Then what am I now?" She smiled. "You're the one who answered the call. That's enough." From the folds of her cloak, she withdrew something small, a lantern. Its glass was old, its frame bound in silver wire. It flickered faintly, not fire, but green-blue light, like the glow of forest moss beneath moonlight. "This was yours," she said. "Before." He took it, cradling it in both hands. It pulsed gently as his fingers touched the metal. It recognized him. No name etched its side. No mark to say who it belonged to. Just light. He looked back at the woods, the trees now still, the shadows long and quiet. The forest had taken his name, but it had left him something in return. A lantern, a path, a silence that was no longer empty, and a story still unfolding, told not in names, but in choices. The village welcomed dusk with the slow rhythm of oil lamps and shuttered windows. Smoke curled from chimneys, children's voices faded into quiet, and doorsteps glowed with the soft light of familiarity. It should have felt foreign, but something in the man stirred as his boots touched the cobbled path. He followed Saren through the winding streets. No one looked up, no one paused. Yet a few faces twitched with the confusion of half-remembered dreams, their gazes lingering a moment too long, as if seeing someone who should be known, but wasn't. She stopped before a small cottage. Weathered stone, ivy-covered roof, and a crooked windshield that clinked softly in the breeze. The lantern in his hand pulsed once. He didn't remember this place, but the door remembered him. Saren stepped aside, offering the threshold with a nod. Inside, the cottage was tidy, lived in, and warm. A fire crackled in the hearth. On the mantel sat carved figures, wooden animals, a trio of birds, a deer with antlers made from twisted wire. His hand hovered over them, not touching, just listening. He turned to her. "Was this yours?" she said. "Once. Before the vow. Before Velmer." There was no grief in her voice. No weight. Just truth, gently spoken. He sat in the worn armchair by the fire. It fit him perfectly, like a coat long lost and newly found. The lantern on the table beside it pulsed in harmony with the one he carried. "You don't need a name here," Saren said. "You just need time. Will it return?" She shook her head. "Not like before, but it will become something new." She stepped back toward the door, pausing only once. "I'll return when the forest stirs again. If it calls, you'll hear it." Then she left. The fire popped. The lanterns glowed. And the man, who once had a name, sat in the house that remembered him, and did not feel alone. That night, the man slept. Not deeply, not peacefully, but truly, the kind of sleep that folds into itself, where time loosens and memory becomes fluid. The kind of sleep where doors open that daylight keeps shut. In the dream, he stood once more in the forest. But it wasn't the hollow deep, nor the path he'd walked beside Saren. It was something older, quieter. Trees rose like cathedral columns. Light shimmered from no visible source, as if the leaves themselves glowed from within. He walked without direction, without fear. Something rustled ahead, and he followed. There, beneath an ancient tree split by lightning and healed by time, sat a boy. Dark hair, bare feet, a wooden pendant hanging from his neck, smooth, unmarked, but familiar. The boy looked up. "You forgot," he said simply. The man nodded. "I had to." The boy smiled, not sad, not joyful, just knowing. "It's okay. I'm still here." The man knelt. "Who were you?" "You," said the boy. "The part you gave up." He held out the pendant. But not all things stay lost. The man hesitated, then took it. The moment he did, the forest breathed in, and the fire, not flame, but the memory of fire, of warmth, of purpose, bloomed behind his ribs. Not a name, a knowing. He would never recall what the world once called him, but he would remember how he made others feel. The weight of choices, the shape of promises. And when he woke, the pendant lay on the table beside him. Real, wooden, and blank, waiting not for a name, but a new story. His own. Morning brought pale gold light through the cottage windows, dappling the floor in soft warmth. The man stirred slowly, the dream still fresh in his mind, not faded like most dreams, but clear, as if he had walked those woods only moments ago. He sat up, the wooden pendant resting on the table beside him. Still blank, still warm. He didn't remember where it had come from, but he felt no need to question it. The house creaked gently around him, floorboards shifting. The windshield tinkled lazily. In the kitchen, a small kettle hissed, though he didn't remember starting it. Everything moved as if the house itself remembered how he lived, even if he did not. On the wall near the hearth, a piece of parchment caught his eye. A map, faded at the edges, curled from age, but detailed. It showed the village, the bordering forest, and beyond that, the deeper paths, the hollow deep marked only with a soft, inked spiral. But something was new. Thin green lines pulsed faintly across the parchment, glowing like veins of moss beneath moonlight. They branched from the spiral outward, weaving paths that hadn't been there the day before. They were growing, alive, as if his journey had carved them into the world itself. Each step, each choice, now written into the earth. He stepped closer. One branch glowed brighter than the rest, curving eastward, toward a place labeled only with a single root. He couldn't read it, but his hand reached for it without hesitation. Something called, not as before, not a summoning, but an invitation. Outside, the wind shifted. The forest had fallen silent again, not warning, waiting. And in his chest, the ember of himself flickered once more, ready to rise. The path led him beyond the village's edge, past wildflower fields and old stone markers forgotten by most. No one stopped him. No one asked where he was going. To them, he was a passerby, a quiet man with no past and gentle eyes. But the forest knew better. He followed the pulse of the map, its memory still imprinted behind his eyes. Eastward, toward that single glowing root. As he walked, the wooden pendant around his neck warmed against his chest, not burning, not guiding, but acknowledging. The trees here were younger than the hollow deep, their trunks straight and pale, their leaves trembling at the edge of every breeze. Yet even here, something watched. Not Velmer. Something older, gentler, a presence in the soil rather than above it. Near midday, he found a stone circle. 6 monoliths, each carved with faded runes, stood like fingers reaching from the ground. Moss curled along their bases. In the center lay a stone basin filled with still water that reflected nothing, not the sky, not the trees, not even his face. He stepped closer. The water stirred. A single image rose, a child's hand placing the blank pendant on the very same basin. Then another hand, older, worn, placing a stone beside it. The image flickered. A voice, faint and low, echoed from beneath the stone. "Names are weight," it said, "but stories are roots." He touched the water. It accepted his fingers like memory, cool and knowing. Another image bloomed. Himself, walking the woods, nameless and whole, the pendant glowing brighter with each step. Not with who he was, but with who he was becoming. The wind shifted again. The forest to the east grew darker. A new story waited, and this time he would not walk as one who had forgotten, but as one who remembers differently. He left the stone circle with the image still flickering in his mind, not sharp like memory, but warm like a dream that lingers on the skin. The voice in the basin had spoken truth. Names could be lost, but stories rooted themselves in the world, in others, in action. And now, he walked as one remembered not by title, but by deed. The trees changed as he moved eastward. Their bark gleamed faintly, like polished bone. Flowers with silver centers bloomed along the trail, petals turning to follow him. The air was thick with the scent of elder leaves and something fainter, like parchment and ink left near a fire. The trail narrowed, and then he saw it. A gate, wrought of twisted roots and golden thread, stood in the middle of the forest with no wall to flank it. Floating just above the ground, the gate pulsed softly, as if breathing. Along its edge, words shimmered, not in any language he recognized, but he understood their meaning. Enter, bearer of forgotten truths. Your story is ready to meet you. He stepped closer, fingers brushing the air where the gate shimmered. The wooden pendant at his chest pulsed once, bright, bold, and then stilled. The gate opened without sound. Beyond it lay a forest alive in a way he hadn't felt since before the vow. Trees shaped like spirals, ferns that curled toward his steps. In the distance, faint laughter, not cruel, not mocking, welcoming. A village? A memory? No, a place where stories gathered. The place where his new name would not be given, but grown. He stepped through, and behind him, the gate sealed, not to trap, but to mark the end of forgetting. The gate dissolved behind him like mist in morning light, and the forest ahead bloomed wider, warmer. This was no ordinary woodland, no wild thing bristling with ancient magic or slumbering danger. This forest was listening, and every step the man took was answered, not with sound, but sensation. The press of wind against his shoulder, the slow curl of vines clearing his path, the low hum of moss beneath his boots, resonating like distant music felt in the chest. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The grove understood him not in words, but in weight, in the shape of what he carried and what he had chosen to leave behind. After some time, the trees parted, and there, nestled between spiraling trunks, was a clearing dotted with stone seats arranged in a circle. At its center, a pedestal of woven branches, and atop it, an open book with no ink on its pages. Blank, waiting. He stepped into the circle, drawn without hesitation. As his feet touched the earth inside it, the grove stirred. Leaves rustled overhead in no breeze. Light pulled downward in shafts, silver and still. And the book turned a page on its own. His hands hovered over it. The wooden pendant glowed softly against his chest, not burning, not pulling, simply present. He placed his hand on the open page. The parchment warmed, and then slowly, gently, words began to write themselves. Not his old name, not his old life, but moments, memories. The sound of Saren's voice in the hollow deep, the choice beneath the altar, the house that remembered him, the stone circle in the whispering east, and finally, this grove. The first sentence formed, glowing faintly. He was not named, but the forest knew him. And then another. He was not remembered, but his story grew. He watched as the page filled, not with who he had been, but with who he was still becoming. The book turned its own pages as if in rhythm with his breath. Each fresh leaf bloomed with quiet lines, written not in black ink, but in a soft, glimmering green that shimmered like dew on early leaves. The words weren't forced from him. They rose through him, not recollections, but recognitions. Moments that had meaning, shaped not by titles or legacy, but by the weight of choices. His steps into the hollow deep, Saren's voice cracking through the roots. The moment he surrendered his name not in fear, but in hope. The book did not demand a full story all at once. It invited it, page by page. Behind him, the grove had grown still again, not empty, but satisfied, like a room where someone had finally spoken aloud what was always meant to be heard. Then, from the edge of the circle, a figure stepped forward. old, wrapped in bark-colored robes, with skin like polished root and eyes like dark sap. The figure said nothing, only bowed gently. In his hands, he held a staff, not carved, not crafted, grown. At its top, a hollow ring cradled a single crystal, green and silver, matching the glow in the pendant on the man's chest. The elder offered it without question. The man took it, not as a gift, but as recognition. Another page turned. When he spoke, it was not with voice, but with the way he stood, with the silence that followed. And as he stepped from the circle, staff in hand, the grove shifted again. Trees bowed ever so slightly. The wind curled inward. The book closed itself slowly behind him. He did not turn back. His story had begun, and now he would walk as one who carried no name, only meaning. The forest opened for him, its pathways unwinding like old yarn released from tension. Each turn brought not uncertainty, but calm. Trees arched above, forming canopies that whispered with welcome rather than warning. He walked now with the staff in hand. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a tool. It was a reminder of the vow once broken and remade, of the silence that saved a friend, of the ember of a name that had burned away so that something deeper might take root. The pendant at his chest rested cool and quiet, not glowing now, just present. He passed a stream where silver fish shimmered like coins in motion. A bird with feathers the color of clouded moonlight landed on a branch above him, chirped once, and flew off again. Everything here acknowledged him, but nothing asked of him. He was a part of it. At a small hill crowned by a circle of birch trees, he stopped. Something tugged at the edge of his awareness, not pain, not urgency. A quiet call. He climbed the slope slowly, feeling each footstep stir the moss like breath. At the top, a single stone, uncarved, unmarked. He placed his hand on it. Nothing happened. No light, no sound. But inside, something shifted. A warmth blooming in his chest, a thread pulling gently through his ribs. And then faintly, he remembered something. Not a name, not a face. Just the way sunlight felt on his skin the day they made the vow. And the way Theron laughed when he tried to skip stones. He smiled. The book had written what it could, but now his steps would write the rest. He was no longer the boy who feared forgetting. He was the wanderer the forest remembered, and the forest was vast. He descended the hill slowly, the wind brushing against his shoulders like a cloak drawn close. The world no longer felt like something to recall or understand. It felt like something to meet, moment by moment. There were no markers, no road signs, only the feeling of the path beneath his boots and the quiet awareness that every step made the trail real. As he moved, he passed through places others might have missed, a grove of trees that hummed when he passed, leaves fluttering in wordless greeting. A pool so still it reflected the sky even when clouds passed before the sun. A fallen log that pulsed faintly with light as he stepped over it, like an old creature recognizing kin. He came to a fork in the trail. One path dipped downward, into shadowed marsh where dragonflies danced like sparks above the water. The other curved upward, toward dry ridges scattered with wind-worn stones and thorny bramble. He didn't hesitate. He walked between them, where no clear trail lay. Not out of defiance, not out of pride, but because his path wasn't one to follow, it was one that unfolded. Behind him, faint impressions marked the ground, not footprints, but echoes. Moments, choices, tiny pulses of presence. The staff hummed faintly as he walked, and he realized that the runes now etched along its shaft were not ones he had read, but ones the staff had grown in response to him. His story wasn't being written by hand or word. It was being etched by being, not to be remembered, but to remain, in wind, in moss, in stone. The forest did not keep names. It kept those who meant something, and he did. Evening crept in slowly, gold slipping into blue as the sky turned soft and shadowed. The man found himself on a ridge where the trees stood thinner, their limbs reaching toward the last rays of light. The air grew still, not heavy, not silent, just listening. He paused beside a tree older than any he'd yet seen. Its bark was silvered with age, wide and ridged like the spine of some slumbering beast. The staff in his hand vibrated gently as he neared. There were marks on the tree, not carved, not natural, grown, spiraling lines like a language not meant to be read but felt. He placed a hand upon them, and as he did, a low tone rose from within the trunk, deep and resonant, not unlike the hum he'd heard in the hollow deep. But this was different. Not a warning, a song, soft, slow, rooted in memory. It wasn't words, but it told a story all the same. Of footsteps on wet leaves, of laughter shared between children beneath a harvest moon, of a promise whispered too quietly to last, but remembered nonetheless. His fingers curled against the bark. He remembered no face, no voice, no name. But he knew this feeling. Love. Not romantic. Not distant. The kind of love that binds stories to trees and songs to bark and feet to the earth long after the body has moved on. When the song faded, the tree left behind a mark where his hand had touched. Not a scar, but a shimmer. A reflection. His presence. Acknowledged. He stepped back. Not alone. The forest did not speak in voices. It spoke in echoes. And tonight it had sung his. Night fell gently, like a blanket laid over the world. The stars peeked through a patchwork sky, dim and soft, as if even they were watching in reverence. The man walked with the staff tapping lightly against the ground, a quiet rhythm to match his steady breath. Ahead, the trail curved toward a chasm, deep, silent, filled with mist that shimmered silver in the starlight. There was no railing, no carved edge, only a stretch of worn stone where the land had cracked open like a long-forgotten secret. And over it floated a bridge, not of rope or wood or stone, but of lanterns. They hung in the air in perfect stillness, hundreds of them, suspended without visible thread, each glowing a different hue: pale green, amber, blue, soft violet. The colors pulsed slowly, in rhythm, like heartbeats spread across the air. He stepped to the edge. The pendant on his chest warmed once more. The first lantern brightened. A soft note chimed, delicate and warm. He placed one foot forward. The lantern beneath it held him, solid, trusting. Another step, another chime, and slowly, step by step, he crossed. Each lantern pulsed as he passed, their light joining briefly with the glow of his pendant, then dimming back to their soft rhythm. He realized, halfway across, that each light responded not to weight, but to memory, not his own. The forest's, each lantern a moment remembered, a kindness, a vow, a sacrifice. He was walking not on a bridge of fireflies or stars, but across the collective memory of a world that had not forgotten him, even when he had forgotten himself. At the final lantern, he paused, looked back. The bridge remained whole, a path behind him, glowing proof that presence was enough. Then he stepped down onto solid earth once more, and the bridge of lanterns began to fade behind him, not vanishing, only resting, waiting for the next soul who remembered how to walk with care. Beyond the bridge, the forest grew quiet in a new way, not the hush of fear, but the hush of arrival. The trees here were spread wide, tall and pale like the ribs of some vast, slumbering creature. Between their trunks, the ground was soft with moss that glowed faintly underfoot. No path marked the way, but his steps knew where to go. The pendant around his neck no longer glowed. It simply pulsed with a steady warmth, like a stone warmed by the sun. Soon, the trees opened into a perfect ring, a circle etched into the earth itself. Not man-made, not planted, something older, a memory grown into shape. Around the edge stood 12 standing stones, each inscribed with a single symbol. No two were the same. At the center, a pool of still water mirrored the night sky perfectly, yet the stars it reflected didn't match those overhead. They were his stars, the ones that watched over the story he had lived. As he stepped into the circle, the 12 stones pulsed one by one, in turn, like voices acknowledging his presence. No words, no test, just welcome. In the still water, an image began to form, not of his face, but of all the moments that had shaped him. Saren's hand reaching for his in the hollow deep. The altar before it collapsed. The house that remembered. The tree that sang. The bridge of lanterns behind him. And then, the face of a boy, younger, laughing, innocent. His beginning. Not a name. A feeling. A truth. He knelt beside the pool, touched its surface. The image rippled, blurred, and reformed into now. A man with no name, but not without story. From behind one of the stones, a breeze stirred. A voice, gentle as wind through leaves, whispered, "To be remembered is not to be named. It is to be known." He closed his eyes and breathed. He had arrived, not at the end of a journey, but at the place where he could finally choose to grow. He stood slowly, the circle calm around him. The water's surface stilled once more, leaving no reflection, no memory, just openness. His fingers hovered above it, no longer searching for answers. He had become one. At the edge of the ring, nestled between two ancient stones, sat a small flame. Not burning, not consuming, just existing like a heartbeat without a body. Pale gold, flickering gently, it cast no shadow and gave no heat. Yet it drew him. He approached and knelt before it. Within the flame, a shape formed, a seed. Small, simple, wrapped in light that seemed older than the stars. He did not question what it was. He simply knew, in the way trees know when to lean toward the sun, that it was his. Not a gift, not a reward, but a continuation. A piece of himself distilled not from memory, but from meaning. He reached out. The flame leaned toward him, welcoming, and the seed floated gently into his palm. The moment it touched his skin, the pendant at his chest dimmed completely, not fading, but transferring. What once was worn as a symbol was now held as a truth. The staff pulsed once in his other hand. The 12 stones brightened, and in the wind, another voice, or perhaps the same one, circling back, whispered, "You are no longer the story forgotten. You are the one who plants new ones." He closed his hand around the seed. It didn't burn. It glowed. A warm promise. A quiet power. A single truth waiting to be sown. The forest had watched him walk. Now, it would follow where he grew. He left the circle in silence, the seed held gently in his palm. The forest did not darken behind him. It didn't fade or vanish. It simply watched, not as a guardian, not as a keeper, but as a witness. The path ahead wasn't marked. It unfolded. With every step he took, the earth seemed to breathe beneath his feet. Trees leaned closer, not looming but listening. Ferns unfurled at his passing, their leaves brushing his boots like a whispered welcome. Light trickled down through the canopy like memory returning, slow and golden. He came to a clearing he did not recognize, yet he knew it. A patch of earth bare of trees, rich with moss and soft soil. At its center stood a single stone bench, smoothed by time, facing a patch of earth that looked, waiting. A cradle in the wild. He sat, and for the first time, he felt still, not restless, not uncertain, simply present. He opened his hand. The seed glowed faintly, not bright, not proud, just steady. It pulsed once, and for a moment, he thought he heard a voice. Not in words, but in feeling. A beginning. He knelt and pressed the seed into the soil. The earth accepted it without resistance. No shimmer, no flash, only warmth spreading through his fingers and up his arms like sunlight through roots. And then silence. But not the silence of absence. The silence of growth. He stood again, watching the soil, knowing whatever would come next would not bloom in haste. It would take time, like all true things, like stories. No plaque would mark this place. No name would be spoken. But one day, a traveler might find this garden. They might feel the earth shift. They might sit on the old stone bench and listen. And they might wonder who had planted the seed that made the wind sound wiser. He smiled, not proud, not sad, just whole. And then he turned and walked on, carrying nothing, leaving everything, and planting more than just roots behind him. The forest let him pass like a breeze through tall grass, untouched, unchallenged, welcome. Behind him, the seed slept gently beneath the earth. Ahead, the trees stretched tall and quiet, their branches curved like arches in a great cathedral of green. He walked not as one searching, nor as one fleeing. He walked like one who belonged. Birds called softly overhead. Somewhere, a stream murmured through stone. But above all, it was the wind that spoke most clearly now, no longer a whisper, no longer a question. A voice, low and endless, moving between bough and leaf. It didn't say his name, but it told his story. And more, it carried it. As he stepped onto a narrow ridge of stone, the wind curled around him like an old friend. He paused, listening not with ears, but with the bone-deep stillness he had learned in the hollow deep. There were voices in the wind now, not words, not ghosts, rememberers. A child laughing somewhere in the distance. A soft hum from someone mending a coat in a house where he'd once slept. A lantern glowing in the hands of another traveler, walking a path that had only existed because he once walked it. The wind carried them all. And him. He looked out from the ridge. Beyond the forest, the horizon opened, rolling hills painted silver by starlight, rivers like threads of memory weaving through shadow and stone. In the far distance, lights, scattered like fireflies, signs of villages and stories still unfolding. Not waiting for him, but open to him. He took a breath and stepped forward. And the wind, ever kind, followed, carrying no name, only a presence, only a story. And somewhere behind him, a tiny sprout broke the soil, its first leaf opening, toward the sky. Night deepened as he walked, but darkness never quite settled. The stars above shimmered brightly, and the earth below glowed faintly in places, moss lanterns, moonflowers, stones warm from ancient magic. The wind kept close beside him, not driving, not pulling, just walking too. Eventually, he found a rise in the land, a knoll half wrapped in ivy, its top flat and clear. A place to rest. Not because he was weary, but because the moment invited stillness. He sat, not with purpose, just to be. He placed the staff beside him. The pendant around his neck no longer pulsed, no longer needed to. It had become part of him now, as natural as his breath, as quiet as the space between footsteps. The wind coiled gently around the rise. And then something changed. A flicker of warmth in the air. The smell of smoke, not sharp or heavy, but soft, like pine wood caught in memory. A glow bloomed before him. A fire, rising from nothing, its flames low and golden, casting no harsh shadows. A hearth, not lit by flint, but by welcome. The kind of fire that burns not to cook, not to drive off beasts, but to gather near. A center for stories, a quiet anchor for wandering souls. And through the firelight, faint shapes appeared, not ghosts, impressions. A woman with silver hair, her face serene. A boy skipping stones across starlit water. A friend whose eyes had once held sorrow, now at peace. None of them spoke. They didn't need to. They had been part of his story, and now they sat beside it, present in the glow. He placed his hands near the flame. The warmth wasn't heat. It was remembrance. Of choices made without knowing the end. Of steps taken because they mattered. Of roots planted where names were no longer needed. He smiled to no one in particular. And the wind, circling the hearth, seemed to hum a lullaby. That night, he did not sleep. But he rested, wrapped in flame, wrapped in memory, wrapped in the story he had become. Morning did not come in a blaze of light, but in the gentler hush before birdsong, the forest holding its breath in silver stillness. The fire before him had gone out sometime in the night, but its warmth lingered, not in ash, but in air. He stirred slowly, rising from where he'd sat, bones loose and thoughts steady. The impressions from the night before were gone. No shapes in the smoke, no whispers in the wind. Only memory remained. And then, a presence. He felt it before he heard it. A subtle pressure behind him, like a shadow remembering how to move. He turned. A figure stood at the edge of the rise, dressed in dark moss and pale bark, Their face was hooded, their hands folded before them. No staff, no pendant, no markings, yet somehow they felt known, as if their story curved alongside his like a parallel thread. No footsteps had announced their coming. They simply were. He tilted his head, a question forming without words. The figure stepped forward. "You've walked long," they said, a voice neither male nor female, not old nor young, just steady. "And now the forest listens." The man said nothing. There was no need to interrupt listening. The figure reached into their robe and withdrew a bundle wrapped in green silk. "This is not a gift," they said, placing it beside the cold hearth. "It is a mirror." He unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a journal, blank, soft leather cover, forest brown, with a single rune pressed into the corner, a symbol he recognized not from language, but from feeling. Becoming. "This is yours now," the figure said, "not to remember the past, but to catch what grows from it." He opened to the first page. It remained empty, but ready, like soil just turned beneath sun. When he looked up again, the visitor was gone. No sound, no farewell, only the faint scent of cedar left behind. And so, he sat once more beside the hearth that had cooled but not forgotten, and on the first page of the book, he wrote not a name, but a place, a forest where forgetting became remembering, and the wind turned the next page for him. He carried the journal as he walked, its weight light in his satchel, but steady, as though the forest itself pressed gently through its cover. The wind remained close, a quiet companion, rustling leaves, nudging ferns, lifting the corners of the pages when he paused. By midday, he reached a grove unlike any before. No grand trees, no twisted roots, just wide stumps, smooth flat like tables, scattered across a sun-dappled clearing. Upon each rested books, hundreds of them. No shelves, no ceilings, no boundaries. Just a library grown beneath the open sky. He stepped between them, each stump glowing faintly beneath its load, some bound in bark, others wrapped in silk or vines, a few no more than sheaves of pressed leaves tied with moss. Every book was different. Every book was alive, not in the way of breathing, but in the way of remembering. He opened one, drawn without question. Inside, stories written in looping script, unfamiliar but readable. A tale of a woman who could speak to moonlight, of a boy who asked a mountain for its name and waited 10 years for an answer, of a beast who shed its teeth to grow trees. He closed it gently and moved to another. This one bore only single lines, scattered like footprints on a quiet path. "She wept once and fed the river." He stayed even when the storm didn't. No one remembers the gatekeeper, but every story passed through him. He smiled, not because he knew these people, but because he understood them. He reached into his satchel and withdrew his own journal, still blank but for one line. He sat at an empty stump, the wind curling around him, and he began to write. Not the past, not memory, but the feeling of moss beneath his palms, the taste of silence between choices, the weight of a name surrendered, and the space it left behind, now filled with roots, wind, fire, and growth. His book belonged here, not for fame, not for legacy, but because it was true, and the forest had made room. He wrote until the sky began to dim, not from sunset, but from the soft drawing in of twilight, that quiet moment where everything seems to pause between one breath and the next. The wind held still as he lifted his pen, reading over the last line he had written. He did not remember the name he gave up, but he remembered why it was worth giving. The page glowed faintly for a moment, as though the ink had sunk deeper than paper, as though the words had rooted themselves. He closed the journal gently and placed it on the stump before him. There was no ceremony, no whispering crowd of leaves, just stillness. And then, one of the library's stumps shifted. Slowly, reverently, its bark twisted upward and out like petals unfolding. In the center, a hollow formed, just wide enough for one book. His. He stood in silence as the journal lifted on a breath of wind and nestled itself into the waiting space. Moss grew instantly around it, gentle tendrils curling to hold it in place. The stump glowed once. The forest had accepted it, not as a record of fact, but as something truer, a story that had grown honestly, step by step, root by root. He stepped back, and as he did, the wind moved once more, not playfully, not sharply, but with direction, calling. Beyond the library, a path revealed itself, narrow, lined with soft lantern moss and small white blossoms. Not demanding, simply waiting. He took up his staff, the pendant quiet at his chest. He no longer wondered what lay ahead. He no longer needed a destination. The story was not about where he was going. It was about how he would walk. So he bowed once to the grove, not as farewell, but as thanks, and followed the path where the wind began to sing again. The path ahead wound gently between low hills, where the trees stood farther apart and the sky stretched wide, painted in shades of soft indigo and rose. Stars blinked lazily overhead, early risers in the deepening dusk. As he walked, the wind returned, no longer a whisper or echo, but a melody. Low, slow, and familiar. Like a tune hummed in childhood and remembered by the bones before the mind. It wasn't a song of words. It was the song of being. And something curious began to happen. As he walked, the path began to respond. Where his boots touched moss, it grew richer, lusher. Stones tilted to meet his steps, forming a rhythm beneath him. Blossoms turned their heads as he passed, petals humming softly in harmony with the wind's tune. He realized, with a quiet warmth, that the song was no longer just the forest's. It was his, too. Not composed, not recited, but felt, shaped by every choice, every silence, every rooted truth he had carried without a name. He paused beside a narrow brook that bubbled with laughter, its waters weaving through wildflowers. Kneeling, he touched the surface. His reflection shimmered there, no longer blank or distant, but whole. He saw the curve of a smile earned through stillness, the steadiness of eyes that had once been lost. He saw not who he had been, but who he had become, a man without a name, but with a voice. And now, the forest was listening to him, not as a stranger, not as a visitor, but as a thread in its own song. The wind circled him once, lifting leaves and petals into the air like quiet applause, and then swept forward, inviting. He stood again, and followed. With each step, the path hummed, and the world, for once, sang back. As night settled fully over the land, the forest canopy above became a tapestry of stars and shifting shadows. But here, on the winding path that knew his steps, there was no darkness. The ground itself glowed faintly beneath his feet, not in harsh brightness, but in soft pulses, a rhythm of light that beat like a second heart. Gold, green, blue, and silver flickered under roots and stones, woven into the very soil. Not magic exactly. Memory. Moments. Each step recalled something he had done, not by image or sound, but by light. Here, a green pulse, steady and slow, when he'd sat in silence beside the hearth and chosen not to speak, only to listen. There, a blue flicker, the moment he touched the ancient tree that sang in silence and knew it remembered him. And farther still, a rich golden shimmer, when he had placed his journal into the grove, giving the forest a part of himself. The light was not showing him what he had done. It was echoing it, carrying it forward. He came to a place where the roots of an enormous tree arched into a wide cradle of earth. Lantern moss grew in perfect rings. In the center, a pool of still water reflected not the sky, but the path behind him. He stepped to its edge. In the water, he saw flickers of himself, not just as he was now, but as he had been through the journey. Uncertain, silent, afraid, brave, kind, steady. And in every form, the same eyes, the same quiet will. He knelt, and for the first time, he spoke aloud. A single sentence, carried not with volume, but with certainty. I am still becoming. The pool shimmered, then stilled. No reply came. It didn't need to. He stood, stepping past the cradle of roots, and the glowing path resumed beneath him. the forest lighting not the way forward, but the truth that he was the way. The forest stretched wide and endless before him, but he no longer measured it in distance. Every breath of wind, every flicker of lantern moss beneath his boots, every sway of branch overhead was part of the same quiet truth. He was no longer journeying through the forest. He was part of it. As dawn neared, the sky behind the trees lightened, not in gold or flame, but in twilight's softest hue, a violet gray that made stars shimmer more clearly. It was always twilight here, not because the sun had forgotten to rise, but because this place was held in a moment between memory and growth, between name and being. He reached a clearing. Grasses bowed in the hush, and a great stone rose in the center, flat and wide, carved not by hand but by time. In its surface, thousands of tiny grooves and etchings glimmered faintly. He stepped closer and saw what they were. Stories, not full accounts, not paragraphs, single lines, fragments, truths. She waited, even after the storm passed. He built nothing, but gave everything a place to grow. No one remembered his name, but the earth did. He found space between them, and the wind curled at his side. He placed a hand on the stone. He did not write with pen. He did not speak aloud. He simply was, and the stone accepted that. A single new line appeared, softly glowing. He walked without a name and left the forest full. He smiled, not because it was an ending, but because it wasn't. He turned. The wind rose gently around him, playful now. There was another hill ahead, another grove, another voice waiting to be heard. He took a step, and the story walked on. The end.